So, it's April. Many of us begin to see a return to some sort of freedom, some sort of post-COVID futures on the horizon. Non-essential shops, beer gardens reopen, and sadly so do gyms. They didn't really have an impact on me one way or another. Football's in disarray thanks to the rise and then immediate collapse of the European Super League. Billions of pounds at stake there for some of the founding clubs, quite a lot more at stake as far as the fans were concerned. And the government could have done with perhaps a bit of European Super League money. Borrowing hits £303 billion for the previous 12 months, 5 times greater than the 2019-2020 levels. High point of the month, I guess, and I would say this, fan power leads to the collapse of the plans for a Super League of European football clubs. Low point of the month, the announcement of the new Delta variant potentially puts unlocking plans at risk. What about the bants of the month, the great banter moment of the month? Hull University announces that they will stop marking down spelling errors in order to decolonialise their curriculum. I kid you not, you couldn't make this stuff up, this is all true. To talk us through the month of April, I'm delighted to be joined by Spectator journalist James Heale. James, welcome, great to have you with us. And Sunday Times Culture Show presenter Grant Tucker.
Nice to be
both
here.
Previously of this parish in one capacity or another, of course. Look, Grant, you immediately, before way before the show said you're no football fan. That's why I'm going to ask you to go through the intricate details of the European Super League with me, right? So let's just remember what was suddenly announced here late at night, such that it couldn't hit the front page of the newspapers the next day. 6 of the top English teams, well actually 5 of the top English teams and Tottenham Hotspur, we're going to break away and forge this new league with Barcelona, Real Madrid, Juventus, Bayern Munich, I think we're on the list to potentially join. And the backlash was absolutely massive. I mean, the whole thing, which you would have thought had taken months and months of planning to put together.
Didn't it fall about 5 days it lasted, didn't
I think
it?
it was 3 days. 24, 48 hours, something like that. 2 days, everybody was back out.
And Boris Johnson, who knows less about football than me, immediately came out to condemn it as well.
Yeah. So doesn't this show that we have a brilliantly functioning free market in football and superb consumer power? These big, giants go and do something. The fans, ordinary, working class Joe doesn't like it, and ordinary working class Joe wins.
Well, I thought it was quite clever on a political point of view from Boris Johnson, the Conservative Party. Nearly all the MPs come out, all were writing columns in their local newspapers, because it was going to take a vast amount of money away from these lower, lesser teams like Southampton and other teams.
Lesser teams. I was appalled that we weren't invited to be the 7th team.
Would you have been for it if Southampton were involved?
Well, no, I'm a man of principle, as you know.
Really is. But no, I thought it was amazing, the orchestration of the politics of kind of looking after those smaller regional football clubs who are really up in arms about this. And I think it's right, because it does belong to the fans. But to be devil's advocate on this, what about the international fans? The fans in Uganda, Korea, they're just worth just as much to Manchester City now as the people of Manchester.
No, I get that. James, what did you guys make of this at the Spectator? I don't think I'm breaching too many. I think the day after it was announced, I received more media inquiries than ever before, one of which was from a colleague of yours at the Spectator, and did fewer media interviews. And I was obviously at the bottom of some list of, can we find absolutely anyone on the planet who is in favour of this idea? Littlewood will be, he's a capitalist. I was actually against the idea, but I mean, no one was in favour of it.
I think you're right. I think that's an indication of just how few people were willing to come out and support it. I think some of the people from the IEA and Adam Smith Institute were the most popular people in Westminster that day in terms of the tours. I think we got Matt Lesh, who's shortly to join this great parish, who was everywhere for about a day. But I think that was the most remarkable thing, which is just the clubs didn't understand what the fans wanted. And as you say, it was really well prepared. They had this statement which appeared on every single club. It was all perfectly the ducks in line, and it fell within 48 hours. Mainly because they didn't understand, for instance, that the Liverpool Football Club wouldn't want Manchester United's owner as a statement on their website. This Mrs Anfield, it spoke to a complete detachment from what the fans wanted, and the politicians did cynically a bit, respond quickly. But it shows that there was no demand for it, and people. I'm an Arsenal fan. I was going to say Southampton's probably got as good a claim to be in the European Super League as my team does at the moment. But
I wouldn't be so sure.
I'm not just saying that because I'm on his show, but I think that it was basically people struck the issue of fairness, and there was no relegation from it. And
no, that's right. It was a closed shop.
It was exactly
the problem.
That was it. If you talk about free market competition, this is the only objection I had to it was the fact that you couldn't be removed from the league. If you were in it at the beginning, you were in it forever. And was that your principal objection, Mark?
Yeah, well, it was, as well as I'm a bit old school as well. I think actually that there's, although obviously matches like Manchester United versus Arsenal or Juventus versus Manchester City are bigger box office than Southampton versus Norwich. Actually, I think they've probably got their teeth into that as much as they can. We've got the Champions League, and I don't think people want to watch, Arsenal versus Spurs every week, right? I mean, God, it's an attack on your retinas when you have to watch it twice a year.
But it's also the magic, isn't it? Leicester winning the league in 2015-16. It's rare, but these things do happen, and that's why people love it. When one of the giants gets defeated by one of the minnows, because that's what makes football great.
Yeah. I agree. The turnover, and I think it's like more than half of the teams in the English league out of 92, more than half of them have been in the Premier League at some point.
Well, that's incredible. It's a turnover that keeps it fresh.
So you get that sort of turnover. You don't see that in the FTSE 100. Now, I mentioned in my opening remarks about this month, and we're touching this in a number of months because it's the same bleak story everywhere, that the government could have done with some sort of European Super League, Premier League football bundle of money, because borrowing in April hit over £300 billion over the previous month. I'm asking a lot of guests this over a month-by-month basis, but Grant, what do you make of this? Has the debt problem got so massive that sort of nobody really cares now whether it's 300 billion, 400 billion, 500 billion? It's just such a large amount of money you can't even get your head around it.
Yeah, what's the difference between 300 and 400 billion? To most people at home, it's completely unimaginable figures anyway. But you've got to remember the reason why it was so high was the furlough scheme, which they had to keep extending because they kept extending the regulations around COVID, which I think by the time you're getting into April, I think we hit about 5 million double vax by then, which was most of the vulnerable people. We did need to keep on these regulations, and perhaps you could have tapered down furlough a lot quicker.
And what do you make of, James? You guys at the Spectator, are often commenting on this, and the government's too big, spending too much money. You guys took the furlough scheme, then paid it back as a matter of principle. What's your audit on where we're at on the government finances? Should we be focusing really on the furlough thing and the whole COVID lockdown costs? I mean, that's obviously made a bad situation worse, but you might argue it's a one-off hit. And the real problem here is the trajectory.
Yeah, well, also inflation, and now we're in December, up to talking about sort of, I think the Bank of England was saying the other day it's going to be, comfortably over 5%. So there's all these different challenges facing the government in terms of, spending, also low growth. I've had a Labour now leading on the attack line about a lost decade. So it's difficult to know where to start, really. But I think given that the Prime Minister has a tendency to be more, shall we say, interventionist and willingness to spend money, that there is definitely a point of contention there, because then also people aren't really feeling the sum, so people want to see a difference on the ground, but that is not yet to translate through. I mean, for instance, Rishi Sunak later in the year announced sort of 6 billion, and within about 3 days, in the NHS spending, there were calls for more of it, because it was difficult for people to actually see where that money was going to go.
I think you're right, in April as well was when the tension started to come out in the newspapers between Rishi and Boris and regulation and against regulation. And I think that's when we start to see a sudden split and Tory MPs going, actually, I've really had enough of this COVID regulation now. I think I was one of those people as well. I was just utterly fed up by April. I remember April 12th, the pubs reopened. I'm sure you were there, Mark, but only outdoors. And I was sat there with an umbrella and a pint, just bitterly sat there shivering. This is wonderful.
Yeah. Well, this is what freedom looks like in Boris's Britain. Brexit Boris Britain. This is the most freedom we get. Just to stay on the public finances though, Grant, yeah, I get the hit, and you're right. Had we eased restrictions earlier, the cost here would have been less. You could make arguments we could have wound down the furlough scheme earlier, or the universal credit uplift didn't need to go on for so long. But actually, and this is what I can't get my head around, even all of that expenditure is cents on the dollar compared to the national debt. And, I'm just sort of wondering, fortunately my finances are in, reasonable health personally, but I'm sort of wondering, if I was £8 million in debt on my credit cards, kind of, what's another 100 grand?
Sounds like my overdraft. No, I think you're absolutely right. I think the debt is just getting bigger and bigger. But the politicians are finding, I think the particularly conservative politicians are finding it very hard to criticise that. We used to be the magic money tree, but once you're spending these ridiculous sums of money, and then when we're coming out of the pandemic later in the year, and they're still spending ridiculous amounts of money, people go, well, the sky isn't falling. So they're not that worried about it. I think when you say inflation rides up next year and the debt just becomes completely unmanageable, which I already think it is, then I think that's when we're going to see a real backlash from the public and politicians.
I think also we're focusing on the month of April. I think nowadays, I think at the moment the electorate's tastes have moved towards a more interventionist, unfortunately for the IEA, favoured role of the state. You know, Boris Johnson got involved with the European Super League because it was popular. People saying, you know, I want them to get involved. And obviously, we're talking now sort of 5 years from Brexit, you know, in the summer of 2016. 5 years on, what we have seen is people took that take back control mantra and they're applying it to everything. So I think that, you know, in March we saw the G20 agree the tax around the world, minimum corporation tax, and that same kind of scepticism towards corporations and a desire for national governments to assert some control against that is, I think, a trend that's going to continue. We see it with government spending, with borrowing, and I think involving in market mechanisms as well.
Yeah, we've got a work cut out here at the IEA. Going back to April, of course, was the announcement of the new Delta variant, and you know, all sorts of variants will be coming up. You can imagine what's going to be coming up later in the year. But what was your guys' take on it at the time? I mean, I'm not a scientist, I'm a simple enough man, but Grant, my kind of view was, look, we've seen the cavalry has arrived now as far as combating COVID-19. Yeah, we might have rolled out the vaccine to everybody, but you could make, I think, a cogent argument that lockdowns or a pause until you worked out, you know, who was most affected by this, or until you started getting jabs into people's arms. But I think there's no more cavalry to arrive. And all of these different variants, which my limited understanding of science says will go on forever, we've now got to treat in the same way that we do with flu. And I understand the other flu vaccines changed each year to look at whatever variants happened there. Delta should have been just sort of treated the same way, right?
I completely agree with you, but I would say that made it more scary, that we had nothing else to do. We just had to sit and wait. So we saw these, I remember the Sunday Times front page, 500,000 dying a day in India, and just thinking, well, hopefully the vaccines will shield us and we'll be okay. But we didn't know when this started to emerge. Luckily, it did. And actually, the vaccines, I think really, the people that supported were pro-vaccine. They were really vindicated in the month of April because we didn't see those huge rises in hospitalisations, which we definitely did in January after the Kent variant.
Should we be been on our doorsteps at 8 o'clock every Thursday to applaud Big Pharma, James? You know, thanks to the great pharmaceutical companies of the world for what they've done.
I certainly think that what the vaccine's done is the reason why I'm more optimistic about 2021 than 2020, because it was due to the interventions and the hard work and the brilliance that went on in those companies. I mean, admittedly funded with some public money, but mainly due to the efforts that was involved in the science there, which has done incredible things. And it's difficult to remember now, but last year people were talking about how this was going to take, you know, almost years to solve, maybe in the latter half of 2020 or something, or 2020 decade. And as it happened, we've now basically got, you know, a much more normal state than we were 12 months ago. As you were freezing in the pubs in April, about like Withnail and I kind of seen outside. So I think that people, hopefully their views of Big Pharma, long derided, may actually be more sympathetic now as a result of this.
Are you really confident about that? I'm really worried that everyone will say it's because of the state grant, and I think, I'm very strict on what public money can be spent on, but it seemed to me actually helping pharmaceutical companies find the vaccine might fit into the category, conceivably being acceptable. But I'm wondering whether actually they're still getting it in the neck. You shouldn't profit from this. You know, you've got to, sell this at a loss and everything. I think one of the companies actually, was it Pfizer? I can't remember. It might have been AstraZeneca. Said, we'll just sell this at cost for a good period of time. Well, now we're going to sort of actually, sell we're in the business of finding vaccines. That's our business model. Oh, well, we want you to do it out of the kindness of your heart, apparently.
The other thing worth commenting, of course, is the cynicism of some of the European governments towards AstraZeneca, and just the way in which it was jumped upon and dismissed as the vaccine, and somehow we in Britain were kind of dismissed for putting our faith in this, when actually, as we've seen, sort of 10 months on, it's an incredibly effective vaccine. And that was very disappointing to see. So, I mean, popular scepticism of some of the pharmaceutical companies reflected at a national level as well.
Yeah. What do you think about that, Grant? Does it put big corporations in a good light, or are we just going to blank that out?
But when we're being told that, there could be another variant on the way, or could potentially be another virus, maybe something to do with antibacterial resistance, and then we're saying, oh no, but Big Pharma should give away their vaccines absolutely free. There's no incentive then to make a new vaccine when the next virus comes along.
The kindness of your socialist heart.
My very socialist heart, Mark. But also, I just think it's ridiculous when they're saying that we should give away the patents away to different countries for absolutely free. I don't understand. At what point do they think that Big Pharma is going to be incentivised to maybe when a new variant comes along to adjust the vaccine, if they're going to have to give it away free of charge?
So, you've talked us through the month of April. Great month for you, Grant, sitting outside a pub with an umbrella.
Hairdressers and nail salons.
Yeah, well, even better. What more?
My nails are beautiful.
What more could you possibly have wanted? But I'm going to ask each of you, and James, I'll start with you to wrap up, to give us your rating for the entire year, right? Often on Live with Littlewood, I've asked people, how optimistic are they feeling? But now I want you to do a kind of retrospective audit between 0 and 10. 0 is nothing could have possibly gone worse, absolutely dreadful. 10 is nothing could have possibly gone better. Well, how do you rate 2021 out of 10?
I would rate it a 7 for the simple reason that the vaccines, I think, turned the tide. And I think in 100 years' time, when people look back at this, step back from the day-to-day and look at the whole period of human history, that will be the big thing. And you look where we were last year, you look where we are now. That's the simple reason I would say it was a 7 out of 10.
7.
4, I'm afraid.
4.
I think 7's far too high. I was a lot more optimistic last year, but to rate up this year, apart from the vaccines, everything just went wrong, including the weather. The weather was absolutely appalling. That's why we couldn't go to pubs, because it was raining all the time.
Very British response.
But also, I just think that for me personally and a lot of my friends, it was the relentless nature in which they pushed back the regulations. So every time there was a new variant, oh no, we can't open the pubs just yet, we can't do the restaurant. And it just seemed to be ongoing, and it wore a lot of people down, including myself.
Well, sorry you're feeling worn down, Grant, but I hope you have a very Merry Christmas to the two of you. To give us a bit, will you pull a cracker with me, James, for a bit of Christmas
Come on, James,
cheer?
you've got this.
Outrageous!
5 in a row? 3 in a row?
I'm doing all right. I'm doing all right.
It's a racket, this Live with Littlewood.
Let's get out the IEA economics joke, and let's see if you guys can get this one.
Okay.
What do you call an economist who sells imitation paintings?
Counterfeit? There's something counter there. I don't know. You got this one, James.
Econ artist. These are absolutely...
Who wrote that one? Give him a sack.
These are absolutely
I love Spectator
dreadful.
now, yeah.
But James and Grant, thanks very much for joining us for this special edition here on the IEA London YouTube channel. Thanks for your thoughts about the month of April and the year as a whole. Here's to brighter, happier days in 2022, and have a very Merry Christmas to the two of you. Cheers. Merry Christmas. Well, if you enjoyed that conversation, why not watch one of these other videos? And while you're here, remember to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. That way, you'll never miss out on a single IEA broadcast.